Hello, everyone. My name is Nav Singh. I'm from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Little bit about myself. I'm senior Android engineer at Manulife. Apart from that, I'm GDE for Android, and most of the time, like maybe sometimes I write articles about Compose, Android, Kotlin, or based on some real world problems that I fixed during work or found something. And today's talk is about the history, how the Android's back comes from like a since starting with API 1 to the latest one, which is like Android 14. So we go through which are the APIs from the first versions we have, then how we get to the newer ones, and then why they deprecate the onBackPressed and what's the new APIs are available for us, and what's the state of the predictive back in the current situation or in the latest Android versions, which is 14. So for the first four versions of Android, the mostly work like if as an Android engineer we want to perform some sort of a custom behavior, like maybe showing dialogues or whatever, there is no API. It's not there like the onBackPressed. I think as an Android engineer, as an Android engineer, we are all familiar with this thing, which is like the onBackPressed that we override most of the time if we want to intercept the back. But for the first four versions, it wasn't there, and we need to use down key down and then check the key code and then perform certain action based on that. So with starting Android Eclair, they provided their favorite one, which is I think the most older API, which is like not deprecated until Android 13. So which is onBackPressed. And there is a really interesting story behind this. When I created these slides, I found that one of the articles which mentioned like when they introduced this API. So it's in the slides, you see the reference link in there. It's back and other hard keys, three stories. And they mentioned there like when they initially launched Android, and they found on the Stack Overflow that most of the time developers, they are struggling with handling the backpress. So if they, as an Android engineer or developers, we want to intercept the back, it was the most asked question for the Stack Overflow, and then they come up with a solution that is just specific for the on back for handling or for customizing the back. So this API is there starting with Android Clear. And with Android Q, which is Android 10, they launched gesture-based navigation. So here is I attached the small video clip that you can just watch to understand what is the gesture-based navigation. So this is again the fun part here. As an Android user, I didn't know that I can actually customize the navigation mode of my device, Android device. So I'm using Samsung S21, and by default it was like a 3-button navigation. And when I'm doing creating these slides, I found that I can customize that. There are like 3 options. So as you see on the left side, it says under the system settings, we have navigation mode. And when we tap on that, we see the next image, which is on the right side. We have 3 options there, which is gesture-based navigation, 2-button navigation, and 3-button navigation. So I don't know why, but they set the default to the 3-button navigation in Samsung devices. So I change it to the gesture-based navigation. So if you are still on the same board with me, you can change the navigation, or if you are just like working on supporting the new APIs and want to test it, this is really useful to know, like we can change the behavior, like how we want to see the navigation mode in our Android devices. So as I mentioned, like this is the most stable, or I can say most long-lived API, which is not deprecated until Android 13. It's onBackPressed. So now if you are targeting Android 13 or you're compiling against Android 13, you will see the lint warnings if you are overriding the onBackPressed in your applications. So it says like this is deprecated, but what's the solution? So in the details, if in the screenshot, it says like there is a new API on backpress dispatcher, which gives us the options to handle the back button for instead of using this API. So during Google I/O 2022 or 21, I'm not sure from which one this video is, but when they initially launched the ahead of time model, which is also relate to the predictive back gesture, which is introduced in Android 13. So this video is specifically about they detailed they described here what's that model is and how that's helping the how they why they come up with this solution for Android. So what this basically means is like ahead of time model, or I can say predictive back, because that's more like a known term that is right now in the Android community. It's like most of the developers know. So when user is performing the back gestures, it's specifically for gestures. So gesture-based navigation is enabled in your device, and when user is performing the back gesture in our applications, the ahead of time model is basically like informing the user like where they are going when that action is completed. So when they perform the back gesture, they will see, like in Android 13, it's only for back to home animations. So when from our application user is going back to the home screen of our Android device, they will see like they get a little bit like extra information that they are heading back to the home page, so they can cancel or they can make a decision before actually performing the back gesture. So this is the internal code, and if you don't want to dig into it, it's fine. I just added here just to provide a little bit more information about how this new API works. So every input comes through the input stage, and this is the first step, like the native pre-input stage here. So in here, when the function process is getting called, they check the event if it's the back event, and if we are using the new APIs for the onBackPressed dispatcher, I will explain next those APIs. So here, like every callback, it's based on the window, like the current window which is active in the application. So if you see the third condition in that if statement, which says like window on back invoke dispatcher is enabled or not. So it's by default, it's off in Android 13, and it's supposed to be by default on for Android 14, but somehow it's still false. So here they are checking if that is enabled. That means we are telling the system that, hey, we are using this new APIs, like we are supporting the new APIs, so please proceed accordingly. So then it goes through the callbacks, like every callback we adding using the new APIs, it will take the first one which is enabled and process that one, and then return the finish handled, so that this current back, just like the back button, like the back action is processed successfully based on the new APIs if it's enabled or not. So this is the basic logic for handling the back in with the new APIs. So starting with Android activity 1.6.0, you need to use this API for using the new APIs, which is like the onBackPressed dispatcher. So this is the default, this is the implementation from the component activity. So in onBackPressed, we have the call to the backpress dispatcher, which is already defined in the component activity. This is the definition of that. So when it's it's defined, they added the default callback. So the default one here, if you see here, like the default callback is calling the supers on backpress. So we are not getting any chance to actually intercepting the on backpress if we are using the new APIs and turned on at the application level that we are using the new APIs. So when we are using that, we have the option just for go with the on backpress dispatcher, like adding the callbacks if we want to customize the back behavior. And this is the implementation of the onBackPressed of that this new API. So it goes through all the callbacks, and if there is any enabled callback, if you see that if condition is in there, if there is any enabled callback, it executes that and return from there. And if there is nothing found, like there is no callbacks, or if there are callbacks but there is nothing found for which is enabled, it will execute the default one, which is like just the standard behavior of like standard definition of the onBackPressed defined in the activity class. It will just execute that one. So now I will explain you how we can add the using this onBackPressed API to add the callbacks from different components from our Android applications, for example, activities, fragments, dialogues, or Jetpack Compose. So this first one is based on the activity. So in activity, we have access to the onBackPressed dispatcher. This is basically the getter for that one. So because the code is in Kotlin, so instead of saying like get onBackPressed dispatcher, we are just writing that onBackPressed dispatcher. And then there is a method it's exposing us, which is add callback, and it takes two parameters. The first one is the lifecycle owner. The second one is the onBackPress callback, which we want to override the handle on backpress. And all the code that we have in the onBackPressed, it goes to the handle on backpressed. So the lifecycle owner, it's really important part here. If we like, there is another option, like there is another signature of add callback is already presented. Like if you don't want to provide the lifecycle owner, then you are basically handling, you need to make sure that you are handling the callbacks properly. Like you enable it, disable it, or you need to be like fully responsible for controlling the behavior of all those callbacks that you are adding here. But when we are adding the lifecycle owner here, it makes sure that when that life cycle it goes beyond the start and pause states, it will automatically make those callbacks disable or enable based on the life cycle's current state. And the next the last code piece, the piece of code that you see on the screen, which is checking basically the API level, this is the internal code of this backpress dispatcher. Because on backpress dispatcher, it's the library, like this is the Android X API, which is like compatible for the older versions as well as accommodating the newer versions. So internally for versions like 33, which is 13 or 14, whatever is coming next, internally it calls the platform APIs for those those APIs and update the back, adding the callbacks to the platform level APIs for those for those versions. So next, if you are using the dialogues, for example, in here I'm using material dialogue. When we create the dialog, we have access to the backpress dispatcher here. We can add the callback, and then because it's a single method interface, that we need to provide the handle on backpress in implementation. So here I'm just setting like a dismiss it and remove this callback. But you can, again, if you want to do some sort of custom work here, you can do it. And this API is changed, and we have now more methods exposed by this in Android 14. So I will explain those later. So this code is until like I can say Android 13, where we have like a handle on backpressed only the method which is exposed. Same from fragments, we define the backpress callbacks, and it's not available like directly on the fragment class, like on the fragment instance, but we get the access to the required activity, which is like the host of that fragment. And then we get the onBackPressed dispatcher there and then add the callback. But again, here important thing is like providing the lifecycle owner. So in fragments, we have two lifecycle owners, or the two life cycles going on at the same time, right? Like we have the views lifecycle owner, and then we have the fragments its own lifecycle. So we only want to, if most of the time we only care about the view lifecycle owner, like we just want to make sure that this callback is not enabled when that fragments view is not in a resumed state, or not user is not interacting at the moment with that particular fragment. So that's why here I'm providing the view lifecycle owner, so that system automatically enable or disable this callback based on the state of the views lifecycle in a fragment. So that was all about the fragments, activities, and dialogues. But the current state is like we are writing mostly our code in composables. Like if we are writing new features, right? So if you want to add intercept the back at compose level, like at your composable level, like at a particular in compose functions, then there is a predefined composable available for us, which is which is called back handler, and it takes the initial state of the callback, which is enabled, with that you can totally control by maybe collecting any state based from your view models or current state of your screen, like if user is editing something or whatever, and then you provide the implementation in for the handle on backpressed. So here I'm just calling on backpressed, but it can be anything. And what it does is like, if you see in the comments, I just want to be like a more clear here so that everybody knows like what under the hood it does. So when we are using the back handler and when we add the callback, it adds that particular callback to the local, the closest local on backpress dispatcher, which is provided by the local on backpress dispatcher owner. Like if you know that we are already using this like for other things like a local context, or I think there are a lot of options that this is already implemented in other terminology, like when we are accessing the theme typography from the current context. So this is similar to that, which is like local on backpress dispatcher owner, and it adds the callback to that one. Okay, so that was like how we're gonna use that API from different components like activities, fragments, dialogues, and composables. Now we will see a couple of options like what are the methods, what are the ways, and then we will go through the migration. So first, how we can define the callback. So in this case, the main option here is like if you want to control the callbacks behavior later on at some point in your program. For example, you want to remove it based on certain conditions, or you want to enable it based on certain conditions, then we can create a callback and have a reference to it. So in this case, I have the reference to the callback, and then I can use the method remove on that callback. So it will be removed when we call that remove function. And if we want to enable the update the state, we can use the is enabled, basically like a getter or setter based on the for that callback, and we can set it to true or false based on our logic or any conditions that we want to use here. And the last one is like on backpress dispatcher. Like for the current backpress dispatcher, if we want to check if there is any enabled callbacks available or not. So we can use has enabled callbacks method on the on backpress dispatcher. So that was like the quick overview of the callback, how we can use the from different components. And now the major part is like the migration. So what are the options as an Android engineers or developers for us having to, like, if we want to accommodate or want to support the predictive back for our Android applications, or if we want to move to the on backpress dispatcher instead of using the old API which is on backpressed. So there are a couple of paths here, like a couple of options based on what's the current state of our application. So the option one we have is like if we don't have any custom backpressed code in our application, which is now I guess not possible. Like most of the applications, they do some sort of like a custom back handling in their in certain activities or at any point in the application. So if that's the case, like if we don't have any custom code, we can just provide the flag like the property in the application tag of our application. It's called enable on back invoked callback, and we set the true. And when we set it to true, we basically telling the system that we are supporting these new APIs and predictive back. So this is the internal code again. If you want to, you can just go to Android code search and see the activities code. It's from there. It's checking if ahead of time back is, this is basically the Boolean flag that we set in the application tag. So it will check if it's enabled or not, then do this thing like register the default callback, which is the default on backpress of the activity. So if you want to dig into like how this thing, all this new API works, you can just dig into to the internal code of the API. So the options two we have is like we have custom backcode, like maybe we are showing some sort of dialogues or exit confirmation kind of thing in our application, and we are using Android X, which is I guess most of the time, like mostly all the applications right now in Android, I guess they are using Android X. So if this is the case, we can use the on backpressed dispatcher, which is I already discussed earlier, like some sort of how we can add the callback and whatever. So when we have on backpressed dispatcher, there are a couple of benefits of using this one. The first one is like it's backward compatible, which is API 21 or higher, which is really good. Second, it's a single source of truth. So what I mean by here is like if we are using Android or like the on backpressed dispatcher, it's backward compatible as well as it's accommodating the newer APIs. So we don't need to perform those crazy logics in our applications where we say like if the version is 12 or if the version is 10 or 9 or whatever, we just use this API and all works for us. And I recently saw the news that Android X is going to support 2 more APIs. So instead of I'm saying it like API 21 or higher, it is like right now probably it's API 19 or higher. So we have like a more APIs supported by defaults. If we are using Android X, then I would highly recommend to use this API instead of using the platform one. So the third option, it's the opposite of the last one, which is like if you have custom code but you are not using Android X. So then we have the platform specific APIs available for us, which is onBack invoke dispatcher. This is internally used by the onBack for onBack in backpress dispatcher API. So there are a couple of important things that I want to discuss here is like, again, this is only available for API version 13 or higher because these are the platform APIs. And when we want to use these APIs, then the thing is like we need to manage the back functionality at multiple places. So what I mean here is if we are using the platform APIs, that means like for older versions, we don't have access to these APIs or right. So we need to have a code for at 2 places. Like the one is onBackPressed, which is like calling on the older versions, and then we register the callbacks for API version 13 or higher, like performing a check, which is like if build version is whatever SDK is 13 or higher, please do this for my for the backpress. I will show you the code in the next slides. So this is basically what I mean is like when we are using this platform API. So first we check the build. If it's at least SDK 13, then we declare the callback. The second is like if you remember, we have the add callback before. So now it's basically we say register on back invoke callback. This is the method from this API. So here we provide the two things, the callback and the dip priority for the for that callback. So we have two options, default and overlay. So default is for all the components like the activities or dialogues and fragments from wherever we are adding those. But the overlay is specifically for things like drawer or site sheets. So based on that, you can provide your priority based on your requirements. And lastly, if we want to unregister this callback based on certain conditions, for example, here I'm assuming that I'm using main activity view model, and then there I have like a back callback flag, and I'm collecting that flag in my activity. And if it's true, I'm unregistering this callback, so that make sure that it's not available for whenever user is interacting with the back gestures in our application. So that was all about until Android 13. So when Android 14 comes up, they provided like a little more. There are new APIs, how we can actually use those. There is a support for Android X transitions API, and there are a couple of other updates that we will go through now. So the first option that I really like is like now we can enable this feature at activity level instead of application level, which is I think really good, because sometimes we don't have like enough time, or we have some sort of constraints, resource constraints, that we cannot support this feature like at the activity level if we are having a lot of activities and we have a lot of custom code in some places. So we can go by piece of by a piece, or I can say by activity. If you have, let's say, 20 activities and you have 10 where you don't override the backpress, you can just simply turn on like the enable on back and work all back in the manifest, so that the predictive back will work only for those activities, and then those are like where you are having some custom code, you can still have the old APIs working. So this is the first update in Android 14. The second is cross activity custom transitions. So until Android 13, it was only back to home animation is there. But with starting with Android 14, more animations are there when user is performing the back gestures. The first one is like when they are performing cross activities, like if they are going from activity B to back to activity A, they will see the animation in there. And cross task animations are also supported in there. So we have like a more more support for the predictive back for these key kind of cases, just for having like back to home animation. So in activities, if you are overriding the animations like entry or exit animations for your activities, you remember we are using the override pending transitions in our activities. Like we call the override pending transition and then provide the animations that we want to have. So if you want to support the cross activity custom transitions, then you need to actually migrate those to these new call APIs, which is called override activity transition. So here I'm using that one, and it takes 3 parameters: entry, exit, animations. And the first parameter is like the which transition, which is like open or close. So you can provide both, like use call multiple times this method and provide the animations in there. And this is available starting with Android 1. Activity 1.8.0 alpha 1. So now I can save 1.8.0 because I think it's already I created this slide a couple of months back. So maybe there is a new alpha versions available for activity which might have more features or APIs in there. So as I mentioned, like before, we only have handle on backpressed, but now starting with 1.8.0 alpha 01, we have new APIs exposed by this this API. So we have handle on back progressed. So as user is performing the back gestures in our application, we get the information about that gesture. So we have access to the swipe edge, which is maybe left or right, and then we get the progress on that. If you see the back event dot progress, that is basically the progress, like how far user has gone with the back gesture. And based on that, if you want to customize something, you can do that. And then we have other two new APIs, which is like handle on backstart, when users starting that and when they canceled it. So we get the more information about the back gestures. So as I mentioned earlier, with Android X, they now with the back gesture is also supporting the Android X transitions. So here I'm saying Android X transitions. So if you are want to use the transitions and you want to do some sort of like animations using this transition framework, it's only like the Android X one, so not the platform one. And it's available starting with 1.5.0 alpha 1. So here if you see, I'm clearing the transition seek controller. So other thing to note is like it only works for all the transitions that support the seeking. So in this case, if you see, I already added in the comments next to the fade. So fade, slide, change bound, explode, extra, those are the transitions that are already supporting the seeking. So we can use those with the back gestures if we want to customize any behavior. So for example, here I'm setting the visibility of my text views, TV1 and TV2, and then in the on back progressed. Based on that progress, I'm changing the controllers properties, like the current play time millisecond, to moving the controller to that particular uh, position based on the back events progress and the controllers durations milliseconds. And then it's the same, like when the handle on back progress is called, I just move my controller to all the way to the end because gesture is completed. And if user cancel that, I just reset the controller and then setting my uh, visibility of my views like to the default state, which is like setting both to the true. And for the other thing is like we also get the support for material design. Like if you are using the material design libraries, we got some support for like some components from material design too. So they starting with Android 1.10.0 alpha 3. There are 3 components they provide support. The one is bottom sheet, second is side sheets, and the search view. Here I have like added the demo for bottom sheet and the side sheet. As you see here, as I'm performing the back gesture, I can see like where I'm going. And same for the bottom navigation. So let this video replay. That we can see. As you see now, I'm trying to close this sheet, performing the gesture. It's like a shrinking toward. So the next thing is like Android team, what it does is like they provide the back design guide, like the design guide for handling the custom gestures in our applications. So if we are having if we are implementing some sort of custom gestures in our applications, we need to make sure that we are not conflicting or we are not interfering with the system gestures. So this is the sample that when I created these slides, I am using WhatsApp, and then I'm trying to update the status and then try to crop the image. But if you see it carefully, then you will see that what's actually happening in there. Like it's basically interfering with the system gestures. So when I try to crop it, it actually interfering with the back, and sometimes it just go to reset the image state without cropping it. So there is this is the link to the guidelines, like I think 24 or 20 dps from both sides, so that it does not interfere with the system gestures. So that was all about the content APIs, how we can migrate, and what are the material design components kind of thing. So I will quickly demo all these new things in my emulator. So the first demo is about the Android 13. So as we know, this is only like back to home animation is there. So this is the example of that one. Like when I'm performing back, it goes back to the home screen. And next we have the Android 14. So if you see, as I am performing the back gesture, that the hello world, the world is getting fading away. That is based on the transitions. When I'm using Android X transitions. And if you see the DroidCon SF23 is also shrinking, that is based on the back progress. I'm changing translating the coordinates of those components. And the last one is like this is the second activity. So when it goes to the previous activity, as you see here now, you see there is a like a little bit kind of a review that you can see like where you are going back when you performing this gesture. So I guess that's all from my side. This is the sample code. I added all the examples in here, like how we can intercept, like add the backpress callbacks, and how we can use the back progress and things like that. All the code basically that I have discussed in these slides, it's available in this repository. And here are some of the references. And yep, that's all from my side. If you have any questions, feel free to drop in the chat. And thank you.
All right. Well,
yeah, thanks, man.
Have a lovely night, Nav.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers, man. Bye.